Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to Shift Happens, the Apocalypse podcast micro version. As we go along in the development of this podcast, occasionally I'll put out a couple-minute version, just kind of a thoughts of the day, or maybe there's some housekeeping or some philosophical things I want to add or explain. And today is twofold. One, I want to talk about why I called this the Apocalypse podcast. The other one, I want to talk about a dichotomy of thought, A-B choices. But first, why do I call this the Apocalypse podcast? Do I think that there's a biblical podcast or biblical apocalypse coming? No. I do think there's a systemic shift coming. I think we're actually in this shift in America and the world. Post-World War II economy created the system that we live in now. I think that's changing. I think there's a multipolar world rising. I think it's going to have some dramatic implications that are already manifesting, and what it means for quality of life, what it means for the cost of goods. That's what I mean by the apocalypse. And also there's some catabolic collapse thought in there. Those sound dire, but really it's just a phenomenon shift. So I don't mean biblical apocalypse. I do mean a seismic shift. The other thing I wanted to mention that today is talking about A-B choices. The speed with which our world moves, I believe, often presents us in a lot of ways with a dichotomy of choices, when it seems like we're presented a lot with, hey, you have to do this or you have to do this, from marketing to even the physical compulsion we often feel about responding to text messages. You get a text message, you probably, if you're like me, feel like I must respond to this right now, or they'll be mad at me, or they'll think I'm, ignoring them. There's other options. You could reply. You could say, hey, I've got your text message. I see it. I'll respond as I am able, because maybe your message requires additional thought. So don't be bound by the dichotomy of choices that our world seems to force on us. But that's really what I wanted to say. There is a third option. You can say, I refuse to allow this A-B binary choice, and what are my other options? Even just stepping through that mental process will give you some additional insight, possibly, or some additional time to think about what you're responding. That's all I'd have to say to you today in this micro version. This has been Rob Thompson with the Apocalypse Podcast micro version. Have a good night.